Hello, it's Jacek Bartosiak, Strategy and Future. Welcome, everybody. And today my guest is Velina Tchakarova. Hello, Velina.
Hello, and it's great to be back. It's such a great pleasure and honor to attend this conversation.
Velina Tchakarova is the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy based in Vienna, Austria. A very prominent and active Twitter contributor and contributor, of course, to the European security debate. One of my favorites interlocutors, almost on a daily matter, on a daily basis. So let alone, I'm so happy to talk to you, to speak to you. We are recording on Saturday morning, on the 6th of August, 2022, and this is of critical importance because I would like to kick off our conversation with two parallel things going on both sides of Eurasia. In the recent days, there was this showdown with Pelosi coming over to Taiwan, and we have a reaction of continental China. Things are, as you wrote on Twitter, accelerating there. I'd like to start with it, but having in context what is going on in Ukraine and around Ukraine about cohesion of Europe. So what is your take on all this, starting from the grand scheme of things?
Okay, so we have to unpack this quite of a complex picture that is emerging in front of our eyes at the moment. And of course, we need to connect the dots so things are indeed connected with each other. The way I look at it, and of course, all of the information and the analysis and assessment is my personal one, and is not related to any national policies or positions regarding my government in Austria. But dealing, of course, also with governmental stakeholders, I can also elaborate a little bit on that later when it comes to European and international decision makers. Now, the first thing is that I personally would have vehemently advised against this visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan in such a critical moment, in such a critical phase of the war in Ukraine. I am personally convinced that it was detrimental in the strategic context of the ongoing war. It was detrimental to the Western interests, to, of course, assist Ukraine by all means, of course, in this critical phase. And what also happened, as we observed following the visit, was this acceleration of China's positioning in South China Sea. Of course, a position that was expected to happen early or later, but given the current situation in China, domestically fighting the failed, or let's say mitigating the repercussions of a failed zero-COVID policy, the socioeconomic repercussions, and the upcoming Congress of the Communist Party in autumn, of course, for Xi to also react to foreign policy challenge, of course, as seen from his perspective, was an absolute must. So in a sense, of course, Pelosi's visit had some sort of upside, namely that more international delegations will follow, probably from European member states, also from UK, and so on and so forth. But the downside of this visit, given the timing, and this is what I actually would have vehemently advised against, the timing of this visit, not the substance or the purpose of it. So the downside of the visit is huge. The cutting off of important exchange formats between United States and China, of course, is in fact the worst news, given also the ongoing actually systemic competition that we put a little bit in the background in the last 6 months. But this systemic competition is actually to be seen at the top of the global system when we try to understand the most important, the most significant systemic processes. And the reality is the following. There is a bifurcation going on right now in the global system. Bifurcation means splitting of the system in two large parts. And of course, now with this new acceleration, we go more towards a scenario of a violent decoupling. What does it mean? It means that the process of splitting of all relevant globalized socioeconomic networks, like the one of the global economy, the global trade, the global energy, commodities, but also international, regional organizations in which all relevant actors participate and interact with each other. So this kind of violent decoupling in two, one, of course, being the US-led networks as they emerged following the collapse of the Soviet Union and were further globalized thanks to the American global power projection. And on the other side, of course, with China now seeing itself increasingly in this position to actually not just show military muscle, but to exercise power in its direct vicinity, mostly, of course, in its direct vicinity in, surrounding China in the Indo-Pacific, but also increasingly taking a role in Eurasia, in the large landmass, where, of course, which actor will be playing the wild card? Russia, but we will talk about it a little bit later. So this acceleration in such a timing, like right now, was from my point of view unnecessary and undesired, and in a sense, the task of boosting democracies and the alliance of democracies in the world was tactical, given the geostrategic implications.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I have a few questions. So, do you really think that this, visit of Pelosi was so detrimental that it really triggered this final, as you said, decoupling and bifurcation, or maybe it was inevitable anyway? So, why make noise out of this at the moment? Because this is the line of argument of those who pushed for that. Yeah. Plus, don't you think that maybe the Americans were, in a way, pleased with how the war in Ukraine unfolds in terms of, entangling Russia, and if they could pinpoint China, that it's on this non-democratic part of the world together with Russia, by creating emotions among the Western societies, anti-Chinese emotions, then in a way, that would be convenient for the American grand strategy of allying all Western nations around one flag, of being, anti-China, anti-Russia. So maybe that was the reason. How would you react to that?
Well, of course, it's still too early to say, but I argue that Pelosi's visit will likely unleash a chain of events and developments with unanticipated second-order events that we are about to see in the next months. First and foremost, of course, the majority of experts share this view that it was a matter of time, which is why it was overreaction on the side of China, and it was critical for the U.S. to show solidarity with Taiwan, and also to boost, as you said, this alliance of democracies, to gather them under a flag, and then, of course, to identify the competitor, namely that it's not just about Russia, but also about China. And yes, I agree, of course, with this understanding. But once again, this always more or less a tactical level. For me personally, this is more or less a tactical of the way how we assess events in the long term, of course. And there is actually no disagreement among American decision makers and stakeholders on both sides of the political spectrum that China is the systemic competitor and the systemic rival. And once again, a systemic rival that, of course, fights its battles in all relevant networks. So we are not talking about only about the military domain, the defense domain or space, with all the layers of this domain. But we talk also about the geoeconomic domain. That means trade, where or in terms of global economy, commodities, and so on and so forth. But I would like to present also the other side of the coin, and that is that in geostrategic terms, dealing with a diplomatic, I'm not saying military for the moment, but a diplomatic two-front scenario, that means battling this all, repercussions on both sides, on the side of the old continent, and then on the side of Asia. From the Western perspective, specifically from U.S. perspective, is actually bad news. And in reality, I would have advised against the timing, not against a visit per se, for that reason that for the moment, the US has to put its focus on assisting Ukraine and trying to assist also the European partners in order to come out of this war, in fact, as trying now to deal with the repercussions of serious aggravation of the security environment in South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific, would mean that once again America would be split in two, and this would also cause, of course, polarization within the political elites. Now, all of this happening ahead of midterm elections in November, and knowing that the Republicans would likely actually have the majority in both houses, means that this polarization will increase. The general approach of United States to China will, in fact, suffer from this polarization. And once again, there is the risk that after the midterm election, the focus of United States on Ukraine and specifically on Europe will actually deviate towards the focus on China. So in a sense, these are the implications that I would like to draw your attention to in the time frame of the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years time frame.
Mm-hmm. Very important consequences and implications stem from what you have just said. So first of all, is that there is already war across Eurasia, or at least a Cold War, with multiple dimensions of high competitions that may escalate even into kinetic war on both sides of Eurasia, and edges of Europe, like in Ukraine, and in Taiwan. So my first question is, and I will have a few this time, is can we talk about the Cold War now between US and China and Russia, or the hot peace? And is it more stable than the Cold War that we faced, between Soviet Union and United States? And if you just could say a bit more about the two-front war, why? It might be obvious of course, for you and for me, why it is necessary to avoid two-front wars. But if you just could tell more about why the United States should avoid such scenario. And the last question, maybe the most consequential, is let's assume that, Velina, that you are running the US foreign policy and security policy. Given the threats that are emanating from Eurasia, of which we have talked so many times in the past, what would be your guideline how to navigate the US foreign policy in order to win?
The last 6 months that
yes, from
Putin...
the US perspective, not Austrian, not Polish, not European, from the US perspective. And then in another tour, in another session, in another series of questions I'm going to have, we will talk about Europe and the European interest and perspective. But if you just could try to elaborate on those issues.
Yes, before I jump into the role of being the US as an actor, I would like just to assess the current situation of global affairs. Allow me just to wrap it up a little bit the way I see it, because right now we read a lot about World War III and direct military confrontation and whatsoever. So first and foremost, I've been arguing since the beginning of the war on February 24th that this was also a manifestation of this bifurcation of the global system, which in fact is centered around a new systemic confrontation between United States and China. And at the core of it, it's about US and China and not about US and Russia. So this is the first major factor. But Russia, of course, took the decision to launch the war. Also, in order, it was not the main factor, it was not the decisive, of course, trigger, but among other important triggers, to also position itself as an indispensable actor to get the pole position in this systemic rivalry, and if you like, even to amplify the systemic competition between United States and China. Why? Because it has a lot to gain from it, but we can unpack this a little bit later. How I see Putin's plans in this war and what kind of layers I have identified in the decision making from a strategic point of view, of course. If I would United States, first and foremost, what often is not seen is that US has been preparing for China's rise for quite some time now. And in fact, there is no big disagreement between, the administrations and parties, the two parties. So when it comes to what the most important systemic challenge to the international relations will be, namely the rise of China, because no one can tell what kind of rise it will be. Mostly, of course, it's anticipated that it's not going to be a peaceful one, and there are already indications for that. So if I were, of course, US, once again, I would be quite focused on the Indo-Pacific in general. First and foremost, China is in a unique position to simultaneously become heartland and rimland power. What do I mean by that? Contrary to US and contrary to rule and control the direct vicinity of its borders on both terrains, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, South China Sea, but also on land. That would be, of course, the large Eurasian connectivity, where we've already observing clear efforts of China's geostrategy in terms of economic infrastructure, transport corridors in countries like Pakistan, Myanmar, Central Asian countries, energy corridors as well, of course. And one major factor here will be Russia in the future. And then this, from my American perspective, would be the most worrisome development, that China would also seek to develop alternative sea lines that are not under my control, because right now I control basically the main sea lines, which facilitate more than 80% of global flow of products of trade, basically. And thus, of course, I have a significant leverage over the main systems of finance, of monetary affairs, with my global reserve currency, of course, global trade and economy. And given these realities, given these efforts by China, I would be carefully observing how successful China is in terms of this combined rimland and heartland strategy, by approaching and forging partnerships with third countries in this direct vicinity, by facilitating alternative, let's say, payment systems, or by bypassing, circumventing, or mitigating my sanctions against third countries. So this full package of measures, actions, and also, of course, long-term oriented instruments would be dedicated mostly to China. My focus will be mostly dedicated to China. And if I'm honest to you, and I'm actually sharing this assessment, and I've been trying to also communicate this assessment in order for the Europeans to prepare for this scenario. I would be working on an exit strategy from the old continent in the long term, because I cannot be dispersed on two fronts. So by refocusing on the Indo-Pacific, I will be also preparing an exit strategy to withdraw from the old continent, the way how I did in what is now called West Asia, namely the Middle Eastern region.
So as an American, Velina, what you're saying is that you would focus only on the Indo-Pacific, right?
Yes. Well, you wanted me to jump into the mindset of yes. So the only actually big difference between Democrats and Republicans in this approach, because this will be more or less the approach I anticipate for the next at least 5 to 10 years, given the fact that the largest economic growth is being projected in this region, and it's not only referring to China but also to India, which is en route to becoming a significant economic power, with all the implications for its regional role, but also with, of course, the prospect of increasing of military tensions between the two Asian giants, India and China, but also the whole ASEAN region, which is one of now largest and quickly actually growing, fast growing, economic and trade blocks in Asia. So this will be, of course, my main terrain. And then I have, of course, traditional allies and partners like Japan, like Australia, like South Korea. I will, of course, approach India in all various domains, technology. That means the fourth technological the fourth industrial revolution, the technological breakthroughs in significant domains, the reconfiguration of supply chains away from China, the withdrawal of American capital and also international capital from China towards other Indo-Pacific partners. All of this will be part of my portfolio. And the only difference between Democrats and Republicans, a main difference would be that the Democrats will be more inclined to launch institutional approach, to work with international and regional institutions and organizations to achieve their goals, and the Republicans will seek approach better by engaging each of these partners on individual
Yeah. How about Velina, the concrete steps that you would take now, just given as a US after Pelosi's visit? Okay, so we have the situation what it is. There are maneuvers and exercises around Taiwan. There is this, suggestion that they can impose the no-go zone around Taiwan, the quarantine, the blockade, the Chinese, I mean. So in all those multiple domains of activity that would try to contain China, how would you react to the particular situation as you would have on your desk now if you were in US?
Well, first and foremost, I would have not allowed the situation to emerge right now, as I was pretty clear about it. That means that I would have not allowed to end up in a situation where I would have to deal with both China and Russia simultaneously right now.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because of the modus vivendi of coordination between Russia and China. Of course, some would say there is no evidence of such coordination in critical fields and domains, but I argue that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I purposely don't say that it's an alliance or intent, but it is clearly a modus vivendi. In a way, both do not need to enter an alliance. Of course, they do not need this whole trust building the way we are used to it in the West, where we build alliances based on trust, based on shared values, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But they share several important layers. The one is that they want to survive in this critical period of the international relations, and now being the US as an actor, for me it will be much harder to actually compete with both on different terrains simultaneously. Still, of course, I want Ukraine to win the war, and actually that would, in my best case, result in implosion of the Russian economy, so that Russia is weakened enough to not play a significant security role on the European continent any longer, given the fact that the European security order has been destroyed on the 24th of February, and I would have to invest quite a lot in helping the European partners rebuild this European order. And at the very same time, dealing with a systemic adversary that is now actually in quite of a weak position for the reasons I shortly outlined: domestic instability, economic instability, problems with the failed zero COVID policy, and also having a leader who is now trying to actually more or less cement his position within the Communist Party and also within the country. So this, of course, means that China will per se show more aggressive behavior towards neighbors and in the foreign policy domain. And this in a time where I'm actually focused on quite different terrain is, of course, not optimal for my interests and my goals. And what comes next is that I also support my Indo-Pacific partners that will suffer from this adversary in their direct vicinity. So I will have to show also solidarity, and I will have to show support for them as well. And that means dispersed.
Yeah, and that is costly, and
that is very costly. And meanwhile, we also have to be very honest. It's almost impossible to happen.
What do you mean?
Dispersed global power projection. That means that it's simply logistically and
so US is too weak to face two-front war simply.
Of course, trying to actually assess whether it's weak or strong. That is when it comes to power. Power is also perception of power. How power is being perceived, the way how money is being perceived, right? When people lose their trust in in a currency, for instance, we know what happens. So same goes also for power. So often it's not even about the empirical side of power, what you can show on the table, what you can put on the table, what you can show in terms of power projection, but it's also about the perception of power. Right now, I don't see any constellation in the political elites that would be inclined to show so much military muscle everywhere in the world, or would be inclined to, let's say, intervene in every corner of the world. So this also goes, of course, into the perception of power, the way how American power is perceived. Now, when we talk about the geoeconomic side of the coin, America hasn't really lost its share in terms of global GDP. On the opposite, over the last 30 years, it actually maintained this share of around 1/4 of the global GDP, contrary to the European powers. The European Union, in fact, lost a certain part of its share because other regional actors emerged. Not only China, but other regional economic powers, and is projected to further lose part of it. When it comes to global currencies, once again, the US dollars is still the king, so to say, in the currencies room, and there is no prospect for any other currencies to actually take this first place. So there are many layers, and right now the point is not about whether it's in reality weak or strong. It's more about how it's being perceived. And of course, Russia and China want to create, and this is the second important shared interest, they want to create, next to survive in this transitionary period of the international relations. And that is the interest of creating credible counterweight that is being perceived as such to American global power projection.
You have touched a very important point that has failed us over the last couple of years, because perceived power is all about credibility and deterrence as a final outcome of the perceived power. And apparently in Ukraine, it failed. So deterrence failed. Whether this was a calibrated failure, you name it, whether Russians exploited this possibility or because of their poor performance of the military, they didn't, it's another topic, but the deterrence failed. And now the question is, in this particular Taiwanese scenario, what unfolded around and after Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, with this quarantine, with those exercises, ballistic missiles flying overhead, landing in the Japanese economic zone, as far as I read on Twitter. Don't you think that there might be an ongoing erosion of the deterrence based on this credibility that the United States is always behind you guys there in Asia, and we're coming with you on the first second of any war, and the Chinese might simply try to show that deterrence doesn't hold anymore, and you guys are on your own, or the Americans' interest, because of the difference of stake, is risk stake probably is different, right? So the risk for Taiwan is completely something different from the risk of the United States, and that's the same with the Japanese and South Koreans and others, and Philippines. So would you expect the Chinese to engage on this kind of a sort of warfare, let's call it a gray zone warfare, by eroding deterrence? And the second question is, does it mean that we are in a new Cold War, which may quickly turn hot, and maybe you're confident that we're heading towards a new war in the Pacific? And then we'll get back to Europe.
I will start with the second question because I can answer it very quickly, and then I will move to the question on Taiwan. I argue that Putin's war against Ukraine was a manifestation of the beginning of Cold War 2.0. So this is the first main thesis I've been arguing for in the last 6 months, and now with the crisis, with the fourth Taiwan crisis, I think this is just another indicator of it. In a sense, of course, this Cold War 2.0 is evolving around similar domains as it was the case in the Cold War. And in fact,
Velina, sorry for interfering, but that might be an interesting shed of light, on your argument. Would you be more confident to pursue this sort of argument? Let's imagine that Kiev fell within 3 days, and Russians are now on the Polish border. What would that change in terms of this perception where we are, whether we are at war, whether we are still at Cold War, or what the Americans would change in their behavior? That might be a good test in terms of the two-front war, and whether they have the stomach to do both.
Well, first, Putin's game in Ukraine hasn't changed in the last 6 months. It's still about total subjugation of Ukraine. Thankfully, they didn't succeed in 3 days, but they will try again and again until they succeed. So we have to deal with the scenario that you pointed to, namely that at some point of time, Russia will try to subjugate the whole country and will try to initiate a change of government with the full program, actually, that they were aiming at from the first day of the war. And in fact, they have been preparing for this war over the last 8 years. If they end up being at the border of Poland and basically at the border of NATO's eastern flank, which is Russia's western flank, as we know, what will change is has a lot to do with the full spectrum of to become this biggest geopolitical construct in Europe, first and foremost. So I wouldn't expect this to end in a direct military confrontation with Poland, probably in this phase. But what will happen is that first, Russia would end up being this biggest geopolitical construct in Europe, setting the new rules of the game. That means that we don't have a European order. It's a complete political vacuum for the European powers. It's a new concept of powers because countries like Poland will not feel safe for obvious reasons. And then again, they will probably feel abandoned to some extent by other European Union members that would not be inclined to, guarantee or provide for
that is the feeling already.
And that probably is already the feeling. I'm just trying to, of course, look at it from the point of an external observer, to try to use the helicopter view right now. So in this scenario, of course, for Russia, the main goal will be achieved, and that is to create this geopolitical bloc with Ukraine, with Belarus. Then next step would be actually not to start a war with Poland, but to in fact, to announce a union with Ukraine, with Belarus, and then go actually further into that parts of neighboring states that can be easily put under Russian control, like it's the case with republics in Georgia, namely South Ossetia and Abkhazia, like it is the case with Transnistria. So taking parts of other sovereign countries is going to be on the menu of Russia, with controlled, of course, risk-taking. And of course, what then would happen, I think, is that this militarization of the basically of the common border on both sides, as I said, eastern flank, western flank. By that time, Finland and Sweden would be also NATO members. It is absolutely the case for a new Iron Curtain, but the Iron Curtain will be moved further eastwards. And then again, we are in the situation where Russia, as I said, would be able to, which is why we need to understand how important it is that Russia loses the war. Because given these circumstances, Russia's goal would be, of course, to establish a vertical expansion of its power projection. Vertical, meaning beginning with the Arctic and with the, of course, Baltic Sea, Barents Sea, and then moving along its western flank to create connectivity with the seas, the Black Sea being the most important also for Russian trade, and then with the control over Ukraine, important natural resources would be added to the commodities portfolio of Russia. And from there, of course, also the power projection in the Mediterranean Sea, in the Middle East, and of course, closing the chapter in Eastern Europe. I argue that that for Moscow it won't be about engaging with the European powers in a hot war, but actually drawing the attention also towards the Indo-Pacific by actually getting an access to the Indian Ocean via the eastern littorals of Africa. And then, of course, relying on the fact that Russia has already become a kind of indispensable partner for both China and India, it is going to try to play its cards in the Indo-Pacific, knowing that America will be too preoccupied there, trying to create troubles, trying to forge fluid alliances and partnerships with regional powers, trying to offer its security services, right? Becoming a global mercenary power for Chinese geoeconomic interests in Asia, in Africa, for obvious reasons that it does not have a significant share or whatsoever in the global GDP, but it has, of course, this services portfolio. It easily gets involved in wars and military conflicts, and it easily sends troops everywhere, in these terrains. Yes. So from Eurasia to the Indo-Pacific, Russia will actually seek to capitalize on this amplified systemic competition. Yeah. I don't see then direct, which actually supports my thesis for Cold War 2.0, that it will be more about proxy wars and also wars with limited risk for direct military confrontation between the main powers along the peripheries of the global powers.
In Poland we call it the scalable war, because even if it's a world war, because if you have thermonuclear weapons, the scale is full. You have the terminal point of the scale of coercion and imposing your will by force. So you need to choose properly how to project power You can't just send the infantry divisions and armored divisions like in the First or Second World War up to the end of the scale, ready just to impose your will on, you know, on your enemy. You need to be careful not to ignite this, you know, the process of using the thermonuclear weapons, because that actually neutralizes your political objective. So that's why this new world war that, in my opinion, is already unfolding has a different appearance. That's what we are addicted to, and, you know, judging the past. But, you know, if you permit me to comment on the scenario that you outlined, you know, when you're based in Warsaw, as I am now, and I'm having a major downpour now of rain as we speak, which is symbolic in a way, is that the scenario that you outline is still, however, you know, unpleasant it sounds, a better one. Where Russia and China are allied, and we have at least a unified front of Western Europeans and United States, you know, standing shoulder to shoulder, defending the limes, the boundary of this world, investing in military, investing in other domains, in competition across Eurasia, controlling the Rimland, at least from, you know, two parts of it, and indisputably also in the Pacific Rim. So this is a scenario which is a basic one, but still quite a pleasant one, where we have this cohesion. And right now, I'd like to turn to you with a request for the unpleasant scenario, and let's have maybe even sometimes a very worrying discussion about cohesion of Western Europeans, whether we stand together in reality, what it looks like in Austria, what it looks like in Germany. You know, for Poland, we already, I think, we are in understanding that we're going to be the forward fortress defending the line. And we are ready to invest money. You see the numbers, what we're investing. Our leader promised to spend 5% of GDP on the military if needed, and we're going to field this military. Poland will take its role. But the question is that I think that Putin's game is all about dividing Europeans through gas and other methods, other leverages, and to create this sort of the new space between Vladivostok and Lisbon without the United States and without those crazy countries of the Intermarium being independent. And this is game number one that Poland and other countries here are playing. And we see the behavior of the Western Europeans as a sort of a, you know, stabbing in the back. And I'm telling you, that will change the European Union forever. If it's not addressed this winter, EU will be a completely different creature. If it's not addressed in line with the Intermarium countries, CE countries. And that also plays some sort of a factor into the United States grand strategy and the British grand strategy. As you see, there is a reason why it's British, Polish, and Americans that are so decisively engaged in helping Ukrainians. While the continental Europeans are hesitant, they are signing letters, open letters to give up on Ukraine, to accommodate Russians, to create some, so why not living along those lines as we did with a beautiful social contract of Germany, thanks to the cheap energy. Yeah, and Eurasia is safe and stable, right? Without those horrible Americans and the Poles always, you know, thinking about, you know, helping those Ukrainians and others. So you're based in Vienna. Yeah. So I think you are closer to the arena of events than I am in Warsaw. So what is your take on it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot to unpack, and I will gladly do it. I share your view. We are still in the, let's say, more optimistic scenario of what I call systemic coexistence. Neither United States nor China want to get engaged into a direct military confrontation. And even this acceleration right now, even these tensions, even this fourth Taiwan crisis will not result, in my view, in a direct military attack on Taiwan. In fact, I argue that Chinese approach will be similar, not identical, but similar to the one took Hong Kong, namely that it will seek to penetrate the political, economic, and social fabric of Taiwan in the long term by using a full spectrum of hybrid warfare with all elements of warfare, non-kinetic, of course, under the radar of a kinetic war, because a military attack on Taiwan would actually entail so many risks for China. And China has learned its lessons now from Russia's war against Ukraine, that things often do not happen according to the plan. So maybe that is probably one of the good news I have for our audience, that I do not anticipate direct military escalation. And of course, this can basically continue over, the next 1-2 decades, depending on China's abilities. But I would argue that this would be rather the preferred way how China would try to subjugate Taiwan, and not in a direct military confrontation. Now, coming back to the more pessimistic scenario, violent decoupling, bifurcation, Cold War 2.0, that is now manifested in various ways, and what it means for Europe, what it means for the European powers. How should European powers react? What is happening right now on the old continent? These are main questions that we need to deal with, right? And as you rightly pointed out, there are obviously different approaches, different views, different perceptions of what is going on in the global system, and how this geopolitical and geoeconomic environment is being shaped, and what is the role of Europe. Now, I see the biggest dividing line, in fact, between so-called Anglosphere countries and their partners when it comes to the approach to the changing global affairs, and to the dragon bear, that means the modus vivendi of China and Russia, and the continental European powers. So this big dividing line between continental European powers like Germany and France, and the Anglosphere being led by United States and UK, in my view, is going to further deepen, because parts of the European Union member states will seek to side with the Anglosphere. Or let's put it.
Velina, if you just could repeat the last 30 seconds, because we had internet problems, and that was the most important part of your statement, I guess.
Yes.
So part of the EU continental countries will side with the Anglo-Saxon sphere, and
yes, and because they see their security interests being guaranteed by them, and not by the European Union, or let's say by France and Germany. And I think that this dividing line now has been further deepened because of the approach of the continental powers to Russia's war against Ukraine.
That's why I said about the European Union will need to fundamentally change if it were to survive.
Absolutely. And here my main thesis is that if the European Union continues with this general approach of looking at things now, there are some positive signs that it is already reacting at the level of the institutions and at the level of European Union members, that it is already reacting adequately to the changes and to the shifts. But the question, of course, is about the speed and about the scale, right? But if it does not do it, as you say, I argue that Europe will become the geopolitical backyard of the international relations. We will be the backyard for other powers to
play the game.
To play the game.
Yes, that I fully agree. Poland has already understood that, and we are getting ready on our own, just not to be pushed back and forth. Yeah, that's why we are investing in the military, and that's a very sobering observation by our politicians. Yeah, so if Germans don't change their behavior very quickly, they may lose their beautiful dream-like European Union with their common market where they make money.
Well, first, based on my observations, I think that there is a logical explanation for the way how Germany reacts, and the way how German elites react, and that is that German electorate is over proportionally, represented by all the generations that are actually not so much interested in foreign or security policy, but rather, as you said, in welfare politics, that they want, of course, the welfare system to provide for them. And this is, of course, the major expectation by German electorate. If you look at, of course, the share of voters.
I understand, but sometimes the times come that you need to impose, because if you skip it, if you don't play the game, then the others will play the game. The same happened to Poland in the 18th century. Yes, we had sort of electorate that wanted to hear only about welfare of their own. And the government couldn't impose, and geopolitical circumstances changed with the reforms in Prussia, with the reforms in Russia, and the geopolitical pressure. Things changed.
Oh, yes. And this will change once again by pain, by feeling the pain, not late then, of course, this winter, because Germany hasn't been prepared for what's coming and hasn't diversified, accordingly.
But tell me, in a more granular way, but there are different voices in Germany. And still, there are guys and there are people that really would like to wait out the conflict in Ukraine and wait for the ceasefire, for the Ukrainians to give up, and still come back to discussions with Russia and save this beautiful deal of theirs for the social contract, that they can deliver then. So what is what does the debate look like in countries like Austria and Germany? So for especially our Polish listeners to listen and to find out.
Well, I think you pretty much summed it up. The general mood is the one of the expectation that if the Austrian chancellor would call the Russian president, or if the German chancellor would call tomorrow and would invite him to Vienna or Geneva or Berlin, to a nice European capital or a nice international conference spot, he would gladly come, and then there will be immediately this readiness to engage in ceasefire talks, and there is no understanding actually among the political elites that the Russian president is not interested in ceasefire talks or in peace talks, and that if there would be any attempts, real attempts, of course, I'm not talking about this news about meetings and discussions on general terms of possible peace talks. I'm talking about real peace talks, that these come up with ceasefire unilaterally, with a ceasefire proposal only after Moscow feels that it has achieved significant proportion of its goals in this phase of the war. So the understanding in the general understanding, the general mood in the German-speaking world here in Europe is the one of the appeasement ahead of the Second World War.
Nice. And what do you think about it? I mean, what is your assessment of this attitude?
Well, this is, of course, first and foremost devastating for Ukraine and for the goals that Europe and the West pursues in the war, namely to assist Ukraine by all possible means. Diplomatic, financial, military, humanitarian, in order to actually not allow Russia to win the war, right? To prevent Russia from winning the war. So, in a sense, this is a kind of a precarious situation because large parts of intellectuals, of so-called thinkers, and people from academia, people from certain circles, interest groups that have been influencing the debates following the first invasion in 2014 are now still noisy enough and still successful in actually shaping the narratives and disseminating actually Russian narratives. And that comes from, from a wrong assessment of the war, from wrong assessment of the security environment. And last but not least, actually from the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding of the region, Eastern Europe, of the country Ukraine, of the country Russian, and so on and so forth. So similar groups of people who have been already influential last time, who have already had, the upper hand in the debates, are now noisy once again. Often people, like I said, without really expertise on the region, because of course there are also experts in the German-speaking world, but they are in the minority. And when they try to explain to the audience what is really at stake, not only for Ukraine once again, because I look at Putin's plans in a three-dimensional approach. It's a three-dimensional approach. It's not only about Ukraine. Like I said, it's about Ukraine first and foremost to subjugate the country. It's about the European security order to also change the rules of the game, to convert secure and stable order into insecure, chaotic order in which Russia would be operating in a more convenient way. Because if you have a concert of powers, you can approach and engage with each one of them individually.
Exactly.
And then again, of course, it's also the systemic dimension, the third unseen, invisible layer, that is to amplify, to trigger systemic competition between the United States and China, because it plays in Russia's head. If you are this indispensable actor, if you have a pole position, if China has to overtly side with you, not for Russia's sake, but for China's sake, for the sake of its own national interests, because it does not have an interest of weakened Russia, which would mean that US would, compete directly with China. So all of this is a very complex, builds a very complex world. And we are living in Europe in an accelerated world in which democracies react tactically to each issue. To each issue, they have to basically come up with a tactical response, not able to connect the dots because, administrations, governments change so quickly, which is normal for democratic order and for democracies, for democratic political order to have different governments. And in a sense, what is happening is also to have this very superficial view on serious systemic issues, because you don't have the time, you don't have the energy, you don't have the intellectual capacity to deal with them and to connect the dots. Right. So, of course, you're right that the electorate, the voters will, change their mind once they feel the pain. But then again, we have to ask the question, and here my main thesis was, in fact, that while preparing for the war over the last 8 years, the big difference was this time was also that the Russian president did factor in the geoeconomic context, and in fact launched also commodities war against Europe. Yeah. That it was part of the, it was not the main reason, of course, but it was one of the relevant layers in the decision-making to start a full-scale war.
True, I fully agree. And structurally, it positioned Russia in a very favorable position of command. And it shows. And it shows now, because Germany is split because of that. Lip service of values, but honestly, it's all about the price of the gas and accessibility of it. So yields from the German economy and manufacturing and the social contract that is stemming from this particular, thing. So
yes, but here what is important is to say that the energy crisis was already taking place ahead of the war. The food crisis was already taking place ahead of the war. We had a situation where one of the main indicators, the FAO Global Food Index, that was indicative of the Arab Spring in 2011, had reached levels similar and even higher levels already last year in December. And when it comes to the energy crisis, it was actually taking place in Europe due to structural factors, but it was partially amplified, of course, by the unwillingness of Gazprom to fill additional storage capacities. And in fact, this geoeconomic environment was completely different to the one prior to the invasion in 2014. So, of course, it was clear that the war would amplify both crises with direct political repercussions for the decision makers. And as you say, one of the main goals was to link certain decisions, like let's take the decision on exports of wheat, to lifting Western sanctions. And this, in that matter, the Russian president was actually had correctly factored in this the way how decision makers would react. The example of let's say partial lifting of sanctions, for instance, by excluding certain Russian banks in order to conduct the wheat exports and the payments, even though that I want to highlight and stress that European Union sanctions policy was never oriented towards food and agriculture sector. So this is absolutely Russian misinformation, that the sanction policy caused the food crisis, but it was indeed amplified deliberately by Russia. And it was amplified not only by the war, but also by certain deliberate actions, like the actions to destroy agriculture sector, to blockade exports, knowing that, of course, Ukraine is a significant commodities exporter to certain parts of the world, and that this would, in fact, intensify the situation on the ground, and once again will push and pressure indirectly European decision makers to take action in order to prevent, let's say, Arab Spring 2.0 from happening, in order to mitigate this implications, which also happened. Now, of course, the next 3 months will be significant. I think that this will be a wake-up call for a lot of voters that will start asking questions. Why no diversification has taken place over the last, let's say, 10 years? Why nothing happened following the first invasion in terms of dependence?
But Velina, there was it was on purpose. Germany on purpose wanted to do it with Russia, to have access to the cheap gas and have access to the northern Eurasia to stabilize the continent. So I think it was a purely geostrategic decisions, and all other things are lip service. This is how it is viewed in Warsaw, and they benefited like crazy from that.
Yes, but if we end up with Iron Curtain and Cold War 2.0, this kind of connectivity will be once again not available anymore.
True. This is why I said this is an optimist scenario, because so far I don't see this scenario happening because Germany wants to stick to the Russian gas.
I think that whether it wants to stick to it or not, it will very much depend on the decision of Russia to, in fact, impose embargo of the Russian gas in order to accelerate political and economic turmoil during the next months. So I think that it will
but
be...
they could play it both ways, just to keep making waves, and create some impressions in the German elites, buying time so that they control the situation.
Yes, depending on the way how, because right now there are some signs that Russia would actually launch an offensive in the south, fearing a counteroffensive coming from Ukraine. My case would be that it would probably try to unilaterally announce ceasefire, depending on how, of course, this whether there will be a military success in the south, but also specifically in Donetsk, because Luhansk is already under Russian control. But in order to legitimize these territorial gains, so it will be an approach to inflict pain on Western governments, specifically on those that are very much dependent on Russian commodities, like you said. Specifically, gas will be the issue in countries like Germany, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, and so on. So this goal of cutting off 2/3 of the Russian gas supply is ambitious and is right. Is the right approach, of course, but in the short term, it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. For obvious reasons, because there are member states that are not diversified. They haven't used the time to diversify, and in the short term, it won't be possible to diversify away from the Russian energy supply. And given this, if Russia decides to embargo the supply in order to inflict political more or less to actually unleash political turmoil, which I think is going to be the case. I don't think that under such circumstances governments will survive. And there are already indications. For instance, in Austria, we have a very shaky government that is indeed trying to survive politically in the moment. So we have also presidential election in September, which is why not a single security issue is being currently debated in the public space. And I really want to stress, not a single security related issue. Nothing about the potential membership of Finland and Sweden to NATO, even though that in 1995, Austria joined together with Sweden and Finland the European Union. It was the symbolic collective membership of 3 neutral countries. Nothing about Denmark's decision to actively participate in the common security and defense policy. Nothing about the changing security environment. Nothing about the changing perception of neutrality as a concept. Nothing about any kind of expectations from the European Union family, from the direct neighbors of Austria, when it comes to Austria's contribution to foreign security and defense policy in the future. Nothing even about potential or any desired investment in the defense sector, with defense spending below 1%. below 1%, while you are talking about 5% defense spending. So to give you just an idea, I think that if this would be the main approach of Russia in the next, like I said, several months to speed up the offensive in order to then come up with, let's say, ceasefire proposal that countries like France and Germany, I think, would be gladly, considering, and then to use the geoeconomic pain that is being inflicted with the skyrocketing energy prices, with businesses closing off, to push European powers to, in fact, exercise pressure on Ukraine, and to make Ukraine concede.
That's again, as I said.
I think this is my main scenario for the months to come, which is why what will be really critical, what will be a watershed moment, is for Ukraine right now to really make a significant push, and also for the external powers to further accelerate the weapons systems delivery, and to change the equilibrium in psychological terms.
And this is why Velina, Poland, is sending all equipment, 500 tanks, innumerable howitzers, ammunition, commodities, and everything to Ukraine.
Yeah. This is the only way out in the short term.
We want them to win and defeat the Russian ground force, because that will postpone the war that will be upon us anyway. And that's a reality ground check in Warsaw, and this is entirely different from what you can hear in Paris and in Berlin.
And here kicks in Taiwan once again. Why the timing was so bad? Because while speeding up also the sanctions, and now is the period when we will see the first implications, the first serious implications of the sanctions for the Russian economy. The main goal being still for the Russian economy to implode, and we are already observing contraction of around 6 to 7%. Without the international isolation, the sanctions are the necessary condition, but the international isolation is the sufficient condition for success. And now, with antagonizing China because of Taiwan, China would not be inclined to agree on any proposals like the oil cap proposal, right? Forget about it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, the Chinese may even be afraid that they are the next ones, and let's better keep the Russians afloat. And why don't we get them lend-lease of our own? Because at the end of the day, it's still China that is the greatest manufacturer of the world now, not the United States, as it was during the Second World War. And the Chinese can really do lend-lease to Russia big time. Yeah. So,
Also, of course, global economy is still very much dependent on the supply chains, which are directly linked to China. And now, of course, with all these military actions, with the military drills in the Strait of Taiwan, I cannot stress enough how important these global choke points are, not only for China, but for the whole world for
the middle class of Europe, to keep the prices of their clothing, other things that are daily, the daily thing, and support the social contract. So that will even increase the pressure against the social contract of Europe.
Absolutely. So once again, we see how multi-layered things have become, and very often, unfortunately, political decision makers are operating in one-dimensional world, and this is no longer the case. We have to deal with non-linear developments, with non-linear systemic processes, and we have to be very mindful of the second-order effects, of the ripple effects, of unanticipated ripple effects before we take decisions. Unfortunately, once again, as I said, I do expect that continental Europe will remain continental Europe, basically operating in a very short-term period of decision making, time frame of decision making. Maybe the good news would come actually from the European Union institutions rather than the European capitals, where certain decisions such as let's say the relaunch of free trade agreement with India, the connectivity strategy, the launch of global gateway, the use of geoeconomic power that that the European Union still is. I mean, the European Union in terms of geoeconomic power projection is still on par with China and United States, and this is something that institutional actors can achieve for the sake of European interests. This is something that France or Germany or Poland no longer can achieve on their own. So, a splitting of roles, having a kind of twofold approach between institutions and European Union members is a wise thing to do, but without the hard power projection, without being a security actor, the European Union will never, ever become a geopolitical actor.
I fully agree. And I think this will be a good summarizing of our conversation. Thank you, Velina. Velina Tchakarova, based in Vienna, Austria. Jacek Bartosiak, Strategy&Future. You stay with us. Thank you, Velina, very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Warm greets to Warsaw. And I look forward to continuing this discussion with you in Vienna or in Warsaw in the future.
Hopefully so. Thank you very much.